thank you for joining. This is going to be a very exciting panel today at Health Tech Leaders. This is Forging Successful Pharma-Innovator Partnerships. And I've been chatting with these people for the last few minutes, and they're all experts in their field. So we'll go around and have everyone quickly introduce themselves before we jump in. I'll be moderating today. My name is Rachel Hutman. I'm the founder and CEO of Hutman Media. We're a healthcare and technology communications firm based in San Diego, California. Anders, let's start with you to please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Anders. I head up commercial innovation in the headquarters of Novo Nordisk, a pharmaceutical company that develops and markets drugs for diabetes, obesity, and other chronic diseases worldwide.
Thank you, Anders. And Joel?
Hi everyone, Joel Krikston. I'm a managing director at the Merck Global Health Innovation Fund. I wear two hats. One is as a venture investor in interesting startups that Merck is looking to partner with. I also manage our strategic alliance group, which is focused on managing those relationships between portfolio companies and Merck. Nice to be with you.
Nice to have you, Joel. Thank you. And Rachel.
Hi everyone. My name is Rachel Shaw. I head up digital business development at Sanofi. Basically, I and my team are responsible for finding companies, diligencing them, structuring the appropriate relationships with them, and then transitioning to our alliance management colleagues and project managers to operationalize these agreements. We cover basically the full spectrum of digital use cases, from how do we transform what we do in pharma to how do we transform the solutions that we provide to patients.
Thank you for joining us, Rachel. And she's actually supposed to be on vacation, so a very special thank you for joining us. And Lauren, if you could please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, great to be here. My name is Lauren Lee. I'm head of digital health at Ipsen. It's a global biopharmaceuticals specializing in 3 therapeutic areas: oncology, neuroscience, and rare diseases. So I lead a team to develop so-called beyond the drug solutions, particularly focused on commercial-oriented solutions for patients, physicians, and payers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so let's jump right in. I think, case studies and examples of how your current companies or previous companies have been able to forge these successful health tech partnerships, are really, really crucial. So I would love to hear each of you just kind of share an example or two. And Anders, if we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. Instead of speaking of one specific partnership or experience, then I would like to say how we work with smaller tech startups. We work with our connected insulin pens that we are just about to launch, and we have discovered that there's a wealth of smaller companies that could benefit from the data that our connected smart insulin pens are capturing. So we are making the integration protocol more or less open source for all smaller startups that could actually strengthen their solution by receiving the data from our smart pens. So that's we've even developed a portal where the smaller companies can actually register themselves and just apply, and the contract we have is really a 2-3 page document. So it's a very simple process, which means that they can suddenly get access to data from in the future millions of patients. Mm-hmm. So that's one way of doing it. And one example is a company from Finland called Happy Bob. This small company have developed a nimble small solution for kids with type 1 diabetes. And when the dose data from our pens then come into their apps, then it really strengthens their solution. So that's one example from my end.
That's great, thank you. And Joel?
Sure, I think I would highlight an example with a company called Arcadia Healthcare Solutions, which is a company that we made an investment in about 4 years ago. Merck is very focused on not just oncology, but also vaccine, a very long history in the vaccines business. And we saw an opportunity to partner with Arcadia, leveraging their population health analytics platform to support providers as they were attempting to do outreach to those populations that were underserved or under compliance as related to vaccination schedules. These are CDC-based guidelines type therapeutics, so it's really above the brand messaging about the value of getting vaccinated for something like HPV, pneumococcal vaccines, et cetera. And it's been a great win-win for us, where it's something that's important for us in terms of making sure that our products have market access to the extent possible. It's a win for the providers who are trying to close these care gaps. And it's certainly a win for the patients who benefit from avoiding downstream complications from not getting access to these vaccines. So that's been a nice working relationship that we plan to continue to scale with going forward.
Thank you. And Rachel.
So, you know, we pride ourselves in customizing our relationships to sort of the scope and the ambition of what we want to do, and also what the partner wants to do. So we've had the great luxury of forming a lot of different kinds of relationships. The one that I'll maybe highlight today is a relationship that we struck with a company called Affidation, and their special capability is around behavior analytics. And in pharma, at least at Sanofi, one of the areas that we didn't have as deep an expertise in understanding in is understanding how the behaviors of patients affects disease outcomes, and using those insights to inform maybe development decisions, commercial decisions, medical market access, et cetera. And so that particular relationship was structured in a way where we could work across different disease areas, different use cases, and we would contribute that kind of expertise, and they in turn had the benefit of sort of efficiently working with Sanofi, and we had sort of this corporate relationship, and it gave them a much faster way to kind of scale and expand their business and their capabilities in working with us. And that's been a very productive relationship.
Thank you. That's a great example. And Lauren?
Yeah, I'll share an example from my previous employer at Amgen. The leadership at Amgen has been very public about the importance of predict and prevent. Right? We as a pharma company, as an industry, have the image of just wanting to push drugs, but we believe that Amgen, and I think many of us believe that we have a role to play in helping predict and prevent serious health conditions, knowing that 20% of US GDP is spent on healthcare. So we formed a partnership at Amgen with a company called Okin. That's a French-based federated machine learning company. And I think the value there is, for a pharma company, we realize our expertise is not really in the cutting edge technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and leveraging the true expertise in companies like Okin. But what we bring to the table is of the network that we have with key opinion leaders, with other industry players, health systems, etc., to bring everyone at the same table for value-based partnership. So it led to a very fruitful collaboration, specifically around predicting for cardiovascular patients the risk of recurring events, which was very important for our portfolio, but of course for patients and families at the end.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was a great example. And I'm so happy to hear so many of you bring up patient engagement, and I definitely want to cover off on how pharma can engage patients more effectively later. But let's stay on this topic for a bit longer. I'd love to hear more tactically how pharma can successfully engage with these startup companies. In my experience working at larger companies, often they steamroll the startups, and the startups can just kind of feel lost in the shuffle, and that their goals aren't necessarily being met, because obviously larger companies just have so many regulations and internal processes to follow. So let's start there. Joel, what can you share?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. And one of the things that we try and spend a lot of time with is making sure that we're set up to be a good partner for these organizations as well. And that means a lot of different things. That means making sure that these smaller companies are actually partnering with groups that have decision-making authority and budget. That means making sure that we've got groups that are willing to be accountable and dedicate team members to these projects, so that we don't somehow inherit, there was a lot of energy around the initial meeting, and then all of a sudden there's no one there to actually run the project. And I also think it means creating a mentality on our end where our groups learn how to iterate and really collaborate with smaller companies. Pharma, in my experience, is very comfortable dealing with sort of big to big as it relates to vendors. And large vendors have an entire infrastructure and apparatus to respond to RFPs and to be able to speak the language of these pharma teams that are used to having very, very polished, finished products that they get back. That's not the case with smaller businesses. So we have to learn how to iterate and collaborate with these companies, really using an agile mindset. And to realize that the fruits of our investment in that relationship come back to us, whether it's in the form of product functionality or those companies build more value, et cetera. So a lot of our efforts are on the internal side, trying to make ourselves a better partner.
Yeah, those are great points, Joel. And Anders, I think earlier you were talking about setting correct expectations, with the startups.
Yeah, I would highlight two things. One is pharma is really not agile, and with our long cycle times and bureaucracy and everything, procedures, you named it, you mentioned it yourself, we are really slow in making decisions, and that's definitely also comes when it is to make decisions for licensing or partnering or acquiring or whatever with smaller companies, and smaller companies rarely have understanding for the fact that pharma really is slow usually. And the other thing I would like to highlight is, now you mentioned pharma's internal regulations, but on the other side, I also experience oftentimes that the smaller tech startups, they are not always totally on top of what the I would say the regulatory bar really is, in particular for software that has to do with drugs. Software as medical device, where the regulations are changing rapidly and the bar is raising. So I would say that's another thing to mention. Keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I don't know about you guys, but I have trouble keeping up with all the changing regulations. It just seems, especially right now with COVID and how rapidly things are moving every day, it feels, right? And then even just the news of the day. I'll miss some huge news event that happened because I'm focused on work. Rachel, you had mentioned earlier shared vision and time frame. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think in addition to the great points that Joel and Anders made, foundationally, I think that the pharma company and the partner side need to be transparent and share a common vision on what they want to achieve and in what time frame. And unless that's clear and understood and appreciated by both groups, I think it can lead to easy misunderstandings and frustrations and issues in the relationship downstream. So I think it's really important to start out with a clear shared vision, and then being transparent about truly the maturity, the experience on both sides that you have, and the risks that the projects and the investment necessary to be successful. Because inevitably both sides may have likely different risk tolerance, different ways of dealing with issues that come up. And unless you have a transparent understanding of how to manage those things, it's very difficult to manage those issues when they come up.
So true. Yeah, great points, Rachel. And Lauren, you said there were the 5 Ps of process and partnership. I'd love to hear you talk us through that.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the points are already covered by the others. But yeah, my 5 Ps for pharma partnerships, 1 is having the right problem to solve. And then 2 is having the proof. And 3 is having the right people. 4 is the right processes. And lastly, but not leastly, the right patient physician centricity. I think the point maybe I'll highlight here is building on what Rachel said about having a shared vision and transparency. I think a core part of that is having a clearly defined problem we're trying to solve together, right? And so there are 2 scenarios. In one scenario, pharma has a problem they already know they want to solve. So here it's how can the tech partner really position their solution to solve that within the parameters that pharma operate in, understanding our regulations and constraints, the risk tolerance, etc. And that's a key differentiator in the startups I see. There's another scenario we've talked about that maybe the pharma isn't very clear on what the problem can be solved is, but they're excited by the technology, by the innovation. I think here it's really important to have the right people, like Joe said, at the table, right? It's people who are at the senior leadership level who can provide that sponsorship, but also people who are at the operating level who can make sure things can get done. And especially when the project is more exploratory in nature, it's very important for the startup to ensure the continuity of that conversation, right? We all know people who move to different roles or different companies, small industry, and then a proof of concept might totally fall apart. So it's important to make sure there are multiple touch points throughout the organization at different levels so that that exploration can bear fruit and be sustained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all great points, Lauren. Thank you. So let's switch gears and talk more specifically about patients. How have you seen pharma engage patients more effectively, and in what ways could pharma use technology to engage patients more? And whether or not that be through clinical trial development, product development. I'm curious your thoughts there. So Joel, let's start with you.
Sure. So I think, we've seen many shots on goal in terms of ways to engage patients. We talked a little bit earlier about one of the real challenges for this industry is to do it in a compliant way. And I think for any of these approaches to be successful, ultimately, we're going to have to figure out a way to find win-win situations there that compliance and legal teams are comfortable with, because it certainly feels to me, and I would guess for many on this call, it feels like there's so much more we could do, but we really can't yet until that regulatory environment shifts. But I think some of the more successful approaches I've seen, would include things like using face recognition software, AI in clinical trial settings for patients to really have a very personalized experience, following protocols, maintaining compliance, et cetera. We've partnered with companies historically to build sort of digital onboarding platforms so that as patients are newly diagnosed and sort of go through the shock of coming into a community that they've never been in before with lots of questions and not sure what to expect, that they have sort of a digital companion to help them there, access content, et cetera. Even to the point of bringing in sort of patient spokespeople, team members that can help our internal product development clinical trial teams think about what is the patient journey through the patient's eyes, and how do we factor in those preferences, those considerations, sort of get out of our comfort zone and our bubble a little bit. So those are just a few ideas, but I think my hope is that ultimately we get to a place where we can do a lot more.
I can't tell you guys how many conferences I've been to where I've been to panels about how to more effectively engage patients, through technology. Not a patient on the panel. So It's all companies, here's how we need to do it. And no one has thought, maybe we should actually ask a patient spokesperson to join us and speak for the patient and patient journey, like we're all trying to figure out what they need without just asking them what they need. Rachel, what can you add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting observation in that life sciences, I think we all say that we're patient-centric, but we're not necessarily experts in, user-centered design, right? And rethinking about, what we do in the day-to-day pharma operations with that kind of user-centered design, and maybe thinking about how we engage patients differently beyond a medical marketing, lens, is something new to pharma. And as a consequence, I think that's why we have to revisit some of these compliance. How do we engage patients in a compliant way? So we spend a lot of time with medical, legal, regulatory, just to figure out what are those new ways of interacting with patients in order to better understand their needs, in order to either incorporate them into the R&D process or incorporate them into the product design, or offer them, solutions that help them with managing their disease. So I think, pharma is still on a journey in terms of really leveraging technology to improve how we engage patients and physicians.
Agreed. Lauren, is there anything to add there?
Yeah, I fully agree with what everyone said. We're indeed, I like the word, the journey that we are on as pharma companies on learning how to work with our customers more. I think for patients in particular, indeed, often even when we're developing solutions that are meant for patients, it's when we already have an idea of what we think they need and we bring to them, oh, is this what you want, in a one-off patient advisory board. I think that really needs to change, starting with having a deep understanding of the holistic life journey of a patient, not just their interaction with the treatment decision, with the treatment journey, but what's their life outside of their disease, their caregivers, their families, and starting from that, having the holistic view of their needs to co-create with patients and their caregivers along the way, right? So as much as we can, we're trying to incorporate best practices from the tech world, agile product development. How can we engage our customers more frequently than the one-off setting? And I think this is a place where health startups can really shine. So for example, right, a lot of you know in the news, MedRhythms is a digital therapeutics company that recently made an announcement. They created a patient advisory board besides just a clinical advisory board. And that's the type of moves that I really encourage companies to make, is making it one of their competitive advantage to have deep insights of the patients.
Mm-hmm. Yes, great points there, Lauren. Anders, we're talking about how pharma can more effectively engage patients. And earlier you had mentioned social media, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, as long as we're not talking about drugs, we can actually engage with patients directly on social media, and actually also do social listening, which can sometimes give us unexpected news about how patients perceive our drugs and solutions. We also do a lot of work with the key online influencers, which, I mean, they have huge networks and get a lot of feedback from thousands of users. So that's absolutely fascinating to hear them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. And getting ahead of things as well with patients. And, right, being more proactive, I think with that online listening is very important.
And if I may add one thing, actually, we've also recently had quite a lot of success with deploying anthropologists instead of relying on more quantitative patient feedback. So really having anthropologists following patients on to really understand their needs for what we need to deliver in terms of digital solutions, especially.
Very interesting, thank you. So let's shift topics and talk about something you guys probably aren't thinking about at all, COVID. I am curious, how COVID has impacted health tech partnerships in your views. I'm currently working with a startup, and they just got funding, and they had to do the whole thing virtually. And it was just fascinating hearing from them how they've been able to, navigate this new course that we're in. So I'd love to hear from each of you, and maybe some of the positives, but also, what are some of the challenges and how you're overcoming those challenges. Joel, would you like to kick that off?
Sure, maybe a couple thoughts there. I think one, and certainly as a venture investor in the space, doing diligence virtually is a new thing for all of us. When you invest in these companies, these are relationships, I would go as far as to say it's sort of like a familial relationship over the years. You go through a lot of ups and downs together. So that's been something we've certainly had to adjust to. I think making sure that our portfolio companies have adequate liquidity has been another very important focus for us right from the get-go. But I think what's interesting about COVID is it's taken a lot of these themes that, you've got disciples of digital health here on this call. We've all been believers, I'm sure, for many years. And if you think about these adoption curves and getting to, sort of the real majority of users, COVID has accelerated that in ways that I don't think anyone could have possibly imagined. Virtual care, telemedicine, et cetera, get a lot of the spotlight. And if you look at some of the statistics on user visits, where you've got big health systems in the US that had maybe a couple thousand visits a month that jumped in a week to 11 million, just shocking adoption. But we're also seeing it on the back end too, as it relates to discovery. I've never seen an entire industry pivot essentially to develop a product, which is what's happened over the last 6 months. You have everyone now is a COVID company on top of whatever their prior therapeutic specialty was. And we talk a lot about themes like real world data, real world evidence. Here's the showcase. We're trying to develop drugs in real time. I think the fastest ever vaccine to market prior to COVID was Merck's Ebola vaccine, which took 7 years. And now the expectation is that we'll have a vaccine in 9 months. And a big part of that is how we're leveraging things like real world data, studying these patients in real time, these patients being enrolled in trials real time, you know, things this industry has never seen before. So it's a really exciting time. I'm a little bit worried expectations get out ahead of the reality, but we'll see.
Yeah, that 9 months, I don't know. I heard an interview with Robert Califf the other day, you know, former FDA commissioner, and he was like, these timelines are being thrown around very loosely. He's like, I think you guys should think about probably like summer of next year would be more realistic. And he's like, the optimist in me wants to believe it, but you know, we'll see. Rachel, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree in that, you know, COVID, like every other business and industry, was disruptive for, you know, for us. And we have had to rethink, you know, or at least adjust all of our operations, right? From discovery, research, development, manufacturing, all aspects of business have to be reimagined in the context where we can't be face to face with each other, with physicians, with patients. So that's been disruptive. But on the positive side, it's meant that it's really accelerated an openness, a risk taking, you know, the adoption, because the stakes are really high, right? To minimize disruption, to ensure that patients get drug. And so I think the agility mindset has really, this has been an interesting period of time, because I think everyone's had to be agile in order to kind of minimize that disruption. So I think there's been a sort of a great silver lining, both for us as a company in transforming what we're doing, but also in thinking about how we can partner with companies to either digitize or transform what we're doing in the current context. So Joel mentioned virtual care and telemedicine. That's certainly one aspect, but there are many other aspects throughout our operational processes that have also been positively affected by COVID.
Yeah, I agree. Lauren, anything to share there?
Yeah, I agree with everyone on the effect of COVID. I think besides the excitement, something I try to keep in mind for my team is ultimately for the sustainability of the initiative long term, we also need to avoid the hype that COVID can create, right? People can get very excited, leadership can get really excited about digital solutions, but I think there were three things. One is still need to address a real problem, right? It can't just be a shiny new object, and therefore we all go for it, and need to actually address unmet needs, and that needs to be still well structured. Two is thinking about the quality, right? And so much of virtual care, of digital solutions is about enabling access, but how can we ensure the quality of care there? And then lastly is policy ultimately need to catch up, right? We have so many short-term temporary provisions because of COVID, but will they be there? We've talked about telemedicine, real-world evidence. How can that be used in clinical trials? So much depends on FDA's position on it. And even for other digital companions, digital therapeutics, it's the regulation around software medical device, privacy, security, that will be very important. So I'm curious, excited to see what's in play.
Yes. That just made me think of another question I want to ask you guys, but I'll let Anders add in his thoughts.
Okay, so definitely. So if there was a burning platform already, then it's just even hotter now for pharma and startups within tech to collaborate. What has changed? Essentially, pharma is not exactly knowing what to do in the era of COVID. I think pharma's primary role is to make sure that there are drugs in the pharmacies. Yes, you can say pharma could sponsor telemedicine solutions and so on, and that's great. I think we should just make sure that we are succeeding with the digital health products that we are already developing, and not panic to make something that is not well thought through. That would be my 2 cents for this one. I don't see pharma setting aside an additional several hundreds of millions of dollars for working with small startups faster and more efficiently than before. I really don't see that coming. We have to remember that pharma is also scared about COVID and how unemployment affects drug reimbursement and prices and so on going forward. So it's going to be a new world. We have to do all we can to help healthcare professionals and patients, obviously.
Yeah.
But how pharma can best help with that, I don't think that has changed massively to as compared to before COVID, because the health systems are already they were already under pressure before COVID. So it's just an acceleration.
Yeah, so true, so true. So Lauren brought up the policy and regulations, around telehealth, and I am curious to get, some of your thoughts and feedbacks, not just telehealth, but digital health in general. Is there anything that gives you pause or concerns in regards to the regulations changing and also the unknowns? Joel, would you like to add your thoughts there?
I think a few folks have said it before, but whenever there's an opportunity like this, I do worry about damage, because there's sort of a gold rush mentality. There's a lot of folks who've been working for a long time to track real metrics and demonstrate real ROI as it relates to the utility of some of these digital health products. And I'm sure, like the rest of you, when the pandemic set in, I think my inbox traffic quadrupled with virtually every startup scam I've ever seen about everyone's a COVID company and 9 million new diagnostic platforms and everything else. So I do worry a little bit about that. I think there's so much energy and noise right now that for companies that have been trying really hard to do the right thing in digital health, they now have to fight through lots and lots of, sort of speculative competitors that have just emerged. But I think it comes back at the end of the day to me around ROI. We are so disciplined and focused on the ROI story for all of our companies, all of our portfolio companies. And I think that can't change now. If anything, you've got the best opportunity you've ever had to showcase why your solution is helping customers in real time solve problems that are more critical than ever, whether that's pick your solution and whatever the application is. So I guess that's my answer to your question. I'm just, I think keeping our companies focused on doing real work, and to Lauren's point, not getting caught up in the hype cycle is really important.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add on that?
I mean, I think similarly, the amount of activity definitely has exploded, and it's difficult to actually separate good from bad if everybody's sort of talking at a very surface level. So I think it's, just to underscore what the others have said, the fundamentals of what makes a good innovation, a good opportunity remain the same. I think what's changed, though, are key assumptions that affect those business cases, right? So some of the things that we assumed about risk around payment and reimbursement, those have changed because either temporarily or maybe permanently because of COVID. So I think in addition to sort of like weeding out the noise is figuring out of these policy changes, what's going to be longer lasting, which can fundamentally strengthen a business case because of these policy changes, whether it be, access, reimbursement, data privacy, sharing of information, all those different things.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So let's talk about this spotlight right now that's on digital health, right? It's hot, we're all burning in it, and it's interesting, and I feel it too, I'm being in healthcare communications. I mean, so many companies are coming at me right now for help, and I will say one of the things I do have to coach some of them is that they actually aren't a digital health company. And that's like, once I get under the hood, I'm like, it's not here, guys, because everybody wants to be in the spotlight, right? So I'd love to kind of talk about that and how pharma can really make the most of this moment, because like we talked about earlier, we kind of are on this like precipice. We've all been believers for a while. Now it seems like everybody else is getting, on board with us, which is great. But I am a little nervous, to your point, all of our points, basically, some of these technologies aren't real. Some of them probably won't last, right? Are we going to throw another clinical decision support tool at doctors that don't work again? So how can we, in your views, make the most of this incredible moment for digital health so that this is the start of something really exciting going forward and actually improves healthcare outcomes? Anders, can you start us off?
Yeah, I think the best we can do is stay patient-centric and really develop and launch solutions that speak to real unmet patient needs and not adding burden to patients. There are thousands of digital health apps already on App Store that are not being used because they are adding work to the patients, and patients, they have enough work managing their disease. So the solutions, they need to take away work, both from the patient and the healthcare professional, and they need to they need to improve outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my one-liner.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, I fully agree, especially on the outcomes point. I think, one of my P's is proof. I think, like Rachel said, the fundamentals don't change, and the proof is just as important, if not more. And that means clinical validation, right? Companies that embrace doing randomized control trials is going to have an advantage over other companies who shy away from that. Regulatory clearance, proven consumer demand if it's a patient solution, all those things are good proof to have. And I think companies who are willing to apply that rigor will stand out. And then I think the other thing is when pharma companies and tech companies come together, is still keeping that balance between short-term, mid-term, and long-term value creation, right? As we've talked about, the business model for the near term is always to augment our drug sales. And there are solutions who can help that, but we also need to keep in mind what's the future, right? COVID is one accelerating event, but there will be others. How can we make sure we are equipped with the capabilities and solutions that future will need?
Thank you. And Rachel?
So I think in order to capitalize on this, it's so important to be really clear on the success criteria, right? Because not every project is going to be a pilot. Not everything is going to be the other end, which is full global deployment. So you've got to pick the right criteria and then measure, and make sure that people are being honest about the progress or lack of progress and what it takes to make that progress. I've seen too many times where people get really excited about a technology, and then we're trying to find a problem, and then people don't really know how to measure, or we're not really able to measure it. And so that's where I think you fall down this rabbit hole of being in love and with a certain company or innovation and not seeing a return because you haven't really been thoughtful about, how do you measure that success? And if it's successful, then how do you scale that? And how do you take it to the next level?
Such a great point. Yeah. Are you actually solving a need? Joel, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating time for healthcare. I've been in this for 25 years, and I'm always amazed that an industry that creates life-saving medicines has such a PR problem. I started out in the diagnostics business, which could never figure out a way to capture value for being the number one contributor to figuring out what a patient's treatment pathway should be and whether you would ever return to health. And now we have digital health companies that have been talking about a value prop for many years, and it's very difficult to drive adoption. So here in this one moment where the whole world is focused on healthcare infrastructure and what it takes to develop a vaccine and the importance of testing, we have this moment as stakeholders in this industry to succeed. And I guess my hope is that we can build on some of the really tangible proof, whether it's data consortiums being created to expedite sharing around drug development, whether it's rapid testing, whether it's digital health solutions really having their moment in the sun, to engender some really long-term changes from a macro perspective, whether that's reimbursement, whether that's things like compliance and regulatory restrictions that we've talked about a little bit on this call. But if we can't get it right now with everything that's happening, there's it might be time to look into another industry. But yeah, we've got a great moment right now.
Oh, that's such a great point, Joel. So one last question. We just have a few minutes. I don't know if we can get through everybody, but this one's a little more personal. I'm curious what you guys are doing to maintain your own networking and building relationships, with your colleagues and peers as we're all quarantined right now. Anders, I'll start with you, even though I think things are getting a little bit better in Europe.
Yeah, we are back working 100%, in fact. But now
okay,
with
now you're showing off.
sorry, yeah, we are
Okay.
we are also hit by wave 2 here in Denmark. But we are offering employees to work from home, in contrast to earlier. With regards to networking, then this remains relatively unchanged. I would say I have the same number of meetings with startups. People are actually probably more just contacting, hey, can we have a short Teams or Zoom meeting or something like that? So I would say network unaffected, largely.
Okay. Okay. Well, for the rest of us that are still quarantined and unable to leave our four walls, I'm curious, not going to conferences affected you? You know, mentally, is everybody okay? We might need a whole nother Zoom call on that, but that one has definitely been challenging for me, you know, just not getting, you know, some of the time away. Rachel.
Yeah, I don't know about others, but I mean, we've still participated in a number of conferences. You know, they're all virtual in format. Some of the conferences have been good about sort of like speed dating or like processes where you know you get to meet companies in a more kind of ad hoc way or you know scheduled and planned way. The things that I think that are missing are certainly when you're at a conference and somebody randomly walks up to you and gives you a business card. That's probably what's missing. But honestly, those kinds of introductions, it takes so long to kind of turn those into something real and meaningful that I actually don't mind converting to sort of a more fully virtual format where you can exchange maybe more detailed information over email, have the conversation over Zoom, bring the right individuals to that discussion. So to me, the only real lost opportunity are the random sort of, you're getting coffee or tea at the coffee station, someone walks up to you. But otherwise, you know, there's still plenty of networking. There's a lot of industry events. You know, people find each other through LinkedIn or through warm introductions from, you know, other VCs or other partners in the ecosystem. So I don't feel like a decline in first dates, but maybe others have had that experience.
Lauren, Joel, we have 1 minute, so if you guys could be quick, but I would love to hear your answers.
Yeah, I think similar to Rachel, I also find the virtual conferences has been quite effective, a lot of them, and you know, I always try to advise. I think the speed dating, as much one-on-one connection opportunities we can still give people. It's really, really nice. And I try to, because we don't have the more coffee chat casual setting, I try to be intentional in chatting more about personal life before we get, you know, into just topic and work. And that's been meaningful to me. And I think the other thing is being more open on LinkedIn. I've been a lot more open in just getting a virtual coffee with people who reach out and enjoy that.
Oh, that's great. All right, Joel.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, I haven't seen the inside of Newark Airport for 5.5 months. So the mental benefit of that alone has, I think, overcome just about everything, including being trapped in my house with 16-year-olds playing Xbox. So I think that's been beneficial. I think on a serious note, there's a seriousness and sort of a purposefulness of work right now that I don't recall feeling previously. And I think we're all so focused on how serious this moment is. It's actually been kind of refreshing. You know, we're getting to decisions faster. I'm getting the people I need in the room more frequently. So it's actually been somewhat enjoyable despite the chaos of the moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. And I agree with you about Newark Airport. That is a good reminder because I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, this has been such a lovely conversation. I've really enjoyed meeting all of you and spending some time with you. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk about this important topic.
Pleasure. Thanks,
Yes,
Rachel. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Rachel.
Take
Thanks,
care,
everyone. Bye.